Kate Falcher. Welcome to Irish Granny Helen, and this is a continuation of our Saturday book, part 12, The Real Marilyn Monroe by Larry Jordan, debunking the myths and revealing intimate new details of her life and death. And we had just finished chapter 33, and you'll have to go back a few weeks and to catch up if you haven't seen it. It's necessary. This is a very, very complicated story. So this chapter, chapter 34, is called Marilyn is Resilient. Let's see here where I am here. June of 62, she was invited to appear at a gala in November, if you remember. Ciros, the president of the company, invited her in honor of the family, not the mob, the other family. She flew to New York to see both of the brothers and to see Zanuck. She was able to hide the remains of her facial injuries under makeup. This is really disturbing to hear this. The older brother was staying at the Carlisle overnight. Lawford was also there, but he had arrived from Los Angeles, and the question is, did he actually travel with her? There's some doubt about that. Anyway, he didn't go anywhere. Lawford didn't go anywhere with the older brother that night or the next day. What was he doing there? Did he go to escort her because of her injury? I don't know. The next day, the older brother had to fly to Yale to give a speech. On Monday, Marilyn had lunch with Truman Capote, and they gossiped about the brothers. I'm sure they did. He said he had seen both naked at a pool in Palm Beach, and there was a lot of hilarity about that, a lot of discussion about that. And then he had an opinion about Jackie that I thought was really interesting. His assessment of her was not flattering. He said she's very opportunistic, insincere, vain, rather a mean person, which is not the persona you see on screen. This is Jackie. Jackie was difficult to deal with. Penelope Lagan, whose husband Bruce served as a political officer in Pakistan, said that prior to Jackie's March 62 trip to that part of the world, quote, they would set up a program to go visit this mosque or a dinner party or something, and the form would come back saying, oh, she won't do this. She won't shake hands. She won't give gifts. She wants to take a nap at such and such a time. It went on like that for months. And I remember the ambassador saying, well, if she's such a basket case, why doesn't she just stay home? And what was so difficult was that she was late to everything. I don't mean 15 minutes late. I mean 2 hours late. Which, by the way, is clueless and rude, but it's also a control mechanism. And she would barely speak to people. She wouldn't shake hands. The press was unfair to Marilyn, and they turned a blind eye to Jackie. Where was that pressure coming from? Capote on Marilyn said she never looked better. She had a new maturity. Zanuck denied seeing her in New York, but he did. He had clout with the board. And she met with him to plead her case, and he promised her that she'd be reinstated. This is confirmed by her friend Whitey Snider. She told him. That's what Zanuck said to her. Zanuck met with Spiros, and they collaborated to pool their stock to make a voting bloc and to take over Fox and to become the savior of the company. The AG was also in New York, and the question is, did he meet Marilyn that day? It's a coincidence that all three, the brothers and she, were in New York at the same time. She flew back to Los Angeles on Wednesday and sent her regrets to an invitation from a party at the AG's house. Her excuse was that she was having this fight with the studio and she couldn't make it. She gave an interview and said things like, an actor is not a machine. We're not just going to the studio for discipline. We want to give a performance. It's an art form. An actor is supposed to be sensitive And executives get colds and they phone it in. They stay home forever. How dare an actor get a virus? She was annoyed with Joe DiMaggio, who persisted on trying to start some sort of reconciliation. And therefore, he would enlist the gossip of his friend Walter Winchell. She rejected his invitation to go to the Coconut Grove, and he got snarky. But his remarks that he made indicate that she was probably still seeing the older brother. Joe DiMaggio got more persistent. He thought her career was now over, so why doesn't she just come back to me? And he hounded her on the phone. And he was just shocked at her determination to keep her career going. Sinatra was back in New York on June 17th. He had been on a 10-week world tour making money for poor children in 8 countries. And he had chartered a 707 because he had a fear of flying and he didn't trust the airlines. He was trying to improve his image because of guilt by association with Giancana and the mob. I mean, it was pretty well, everybody assumed he was mobbed up. So he landed after this world tour and had a press conference. And he was asked about the situation with Marilyn, and he said, she and Dean are the whipping boys to satisfy the stockholders. He said, but it doesn't matter because canceling the movie, they did everybody a favor. The script was lousy. He and the Lawfords arrived at the same hotel, but at separately. And then he and Pat Lawford stayed on for some quality time. The media tried to whitewash it. It's interesting what they would talk about and what they wouldn't talk about. They made some lame excuse for why they were both there at the same. This is Sinatra and Pat Lawford. A wiretap that was listened to a month earlier heard Sinatra say he's going to stay with Pat, stay fooling around with Pat for information. And she either didn't know that that was his attitude, that he was trying to get information out of her, or she didn't care. Back in Los Angeles, he took Marilyn to dinner and offered to have his own company, the Essex Company, produce her next film. They talked about movie possibilities that they could do together. One was called How to Murder Your Wife. The writer, George Axelrod, had caricatured Marilyn Monroe, and she'd been played by Jane Mansfield in Will Success Spoil Rock Hudson? That was a Marilyn Monroe portrayal in that movie. Marilyn didn't like that kind of thing. She was offended. But she knew that this writer, George Axelrod, was a good writer. The other movie was What a Way to Go. A wife is some sort of fatal jinx to a long string of husbands, so she is serially widowed. It culminates in a columnist referred to Marilyn Monroe being difficult and called that movie How to Murder Your Co-Star, the potential for that movie with her in it. Dean Martin said that he'd quit movies if Marilyn Monroe was not allowed to be in it. He was loyal to her for insisting on him being in Something's Got to Give over James Gardner. Fox sued him $3 million for breach of contract. So he countersued Fox for $6.8 million for damage to his reputation. Marilyn saw a major ally in Dean Martin, and especially with Zanuck, because he held a lot of sway with Zanuck. She was optimistic, and people said she was optimistic. She was not on a downward spiral. Many remarked about how well she looked and acted, that she was in great spirits. She was doing yoga, Tai Chi, getting facials, walking in the park to watch children play, playing with her dog outside. She went to the beach often, ran the beach, and read self-help books. She was still frustrated by the delay with the furniture not coming from Mexico. She got in touch with friends, the Fields, remember the famous communist fields in Mexico to get them to intervene and try to figure out what was wrong. But she certainly didn't give the indications of somebody who'd lost interest in living. She saw Dr. Greenson every day, but resumed doing phone sessions with Dr. Hottenberg in New York. It's like she wasn't getting enough out of Greenson, and she really wanted to have better therapy. Maybe Hohenberg finally helped her get a healthy perspective on Greenson. It's hard to say. Were they in cahoots? Working at cross purposes? Did they have her best interests at heart? There was bad speculation in the press about her future. The London Daily Mirror said she is no longer the star and Hollywood wonders what she will do next. For the moment she lives in seclusion. Can Marilyn make that comeback film? And the world joins Hollywood in asking yet another question. Can Marilyn finally be finished? And Marilyn said, well, you know, they've been talking like that ever since I'd had bit parts. Hedda Hopper, in short, was toxic. She said things like, okay, the title of this article she wrote was Marilyn Monroe has had it. At the end of the road, fired by Fox, scarcely has an asset. Producers don't want to deal with her. She's emotionally disturbed, but she has ruthless behavior that's impossible to forgive. Claims that she's too sick to work more than 5 days in April. You know, none of this is true. She wasn't too sick in May to fly to New York and sing Happy Birthday to You. Marilyn surprised everybody by showing up on set, and they thought she was preparing for the soundstage when a helicopter set down in the lot, and she boarded it and disappeared without a goodbye. All untrue. And in the evening of June 1st, she was robust enough to sit in the night air in Chavez Ravine watching the Los Angeles Angels play the New York Yankees. That was the charity event she attended. There was talk of her being dissatisfied with her contract, but Hedda Hopper said, I think that's absurd. They gave her everything she wanted. One of the last things she did for her was to hire Wally Cox for a cameo role. Almost certainly it marks the end of an era for Marilyn Monroe. She failed, and it's all over for her. And then she made erroneous comments about Sinatra and Dean Martin. It would have been tempting to respond, but Marilyn remained above the fray, despite Hopper claiming she was finished. She had affection for her hairdresser, Sidney Guilleroff, and his name, keep that in your mind because he's going to be around a lot. He worked at MGM for more than 40 years in more than 1,000 movies. He created many iconic looks of many stars. One of Hollywood's most creative and celebrated hairstylists for men and women, he was trusted with a lot of secrets, and he was honorable. In 1938, he was the first unmarried man in the United States who was allowed to adopt a child, a 1-year-old boy. This was opposed by the state of California, but he prevailed, and then he adopted 2 more, and he raised 3 children. He approached Fox and offered to get rid of the people around Marilyn Monroe. Now we're talking Pat Newcomb and the Strasbergs and Greenson and Engelberg and all the Eunice, these people that were so detrimental to her. And Fox agreed to take her back if Sidney could successfully clear the decks and get rid of these people. Because of him, Zanuck and Syros questioned the big shots at Fox, flew to Los Angeles to confer with Levathis about rehiring her. So there was pressure on. They agreed to a meeting with Marilyn Monroe, Fox did, at her house, without her agent, without her attorney. Pat Newcomb agreed to hide in the closet and listen and take notes. In 1992, Levathis said, I quote, I was responsible for firing her and I wanted to personally rehire her. There was no bad blood. she just didn't want her name to be tarnished. They insisted that Greenson and Strasburg's be banned from the set and Newcomb be banned from the set. These people were a menace. Sidney Wheelroff, later agreed with Fox and said that those people interfered with Marilyn during filming. She was already determined to get rid of Greenson and therefore getting emotional support from whom? Hohenberg in New York, probably. Ralph was back in her life because she told Greenson, forget it, he's my friend. But he would wait until after 6 p.m. when Eunice went home for the day. They didn't like each other. Engelberg, of course, was still showing up to give her shots randomly, and no one's quite sure what that was. Greenson was still whining that he had his vacation ruined by Marilyn Monroe. But eventually her face healed, and she did photo shoots and interviews. She was on the cover of, check this out, 72 magazines in 32 countries in this time period. Not in her life, in this time period. And it proved she was great because she always looked wonderful. She was late to one photo shoot with a guy called Stern from Vogue, but it was because previous to the photo shoot, she had a meeting with Lavathis, and he made her late. He kept her much later. Whitey Snider did the makeup. I guess he had something to say here. Mr. Stern from Vogue rented a suite at the Bel Air Hotel so as to accomplish the first of the picture-taking sessions he had with Marilyn that summer, scheduled for 3 successive days, and Whitey Snider did her makeup. Stern, the photographer, wrote, her skin was as fine and translucent as real silk. It had the faintest aura of gold on it, like a peach. I stood there like a dazed lover. Marilyn had the power. She was light and the goddess and the moon, the space and the dream, the mystery and the danger. This is a professional fashion photographer who took pictures of beautiful women all the time. Let's see, where am I? After her death, Stern printed even the ones that showed her scar, her gallbladder with its scar, and he was the one who revealed that she was trying to hide. And when he was confronted about it, he said, well, she was dead. Why bother trying to hide it? He did 2 more far better shoots. And George Masters, who was then hired as her hairstylist for these sittings, said she never felt better and she looked utterly fantastic, like something shining and ethereal. This was a lady who talked a lot that week about the future. She had no time for brooding over the past, even the recent past. Chapter 35, Photo Shoots and Kennedy Intrigue. Monday, June 25th, she called the AG in D.C. He called Fox. Given his family association with the board, would his intercession have helped? Would he have helped? Or did he call them for other reasons? The White House pressure from the AG to reinstate Marilyn. This is okay. So Walter Winchell was asserting that interference was coming from the White House to get her job back. Theodore whitewashed the public image of the AG, called him a Boston Puritan. I read a lot of this stuff and I believed it. I feel like it just goes to show you, if you don't know what you're reading is baloney, you might believe it. There was an enormous campaign of image creation going on. I fell for it. And then the other thing is people are complex. More than one thing about a person can be true. But he was not a Boston Puritan. He was well known to be a serial adulterer. He shared women with his brother, but he was more involved personally with Marilyn. The other brother, it was more a conquest. She was just a titillating diversion when it was convenient. But there's no evidence of like a romantic, long-lasting love, that she wanted him to divorce, that he intended to divorce for her. For somebody else, yes, we'll talk about that. No promises or expectations made to her of remarriage or anything like it. She was not looking to marry again. Anything like that with the AG would have ruined both of their careers. And she was a realist. I mean, it was out of the question with the older brother, but it was foolishness with the younger brother too. She enjoyed the flirtation, and he just was a philanderer. She dated married men. She didn't condone it, but she wasn't moralistic about it either. But apparently, according to the author, this is typical behavior of people with childhood history of trauma. But she was not indiscriminate. She rebuffed a number of powerful men, really wealthy, who wanted to support her, and she just wasn't feeling it. In this case, she was the pursued. They were the pursuers. Usually, often she was the one, but in this case, she was pursued. So at this point, the author kind of took a detour to discuss the inconsistencies in information in the online blog world of Marilyn. And I figured, you know, yeah, there are a lot of, he would produce a lie that had been told on blogs and then give the background for the truth, and there was a lot of it, so I'm just going to skip over that. But be aware there are a few parts of the book where it's just chock full of information. If there was anything, you know, interesting, I took it out to tell you. So the AG was in a superfluous LA trip, not official business. Marilyn met up with him at Lawford's beach house, and their neighbor testified to this, not testified, but admitted this later, and said that Marilyn was nuts about the AG. She was fascinated. She loved his brain, his mental part. They had a real sort of an intellectual connection. Anyway, he stayed at the hotel, and he did not stay at Lawford's, and the question is this to provide them with some privacy? While in Los Angeles, he put personal business about his book, business with Fox, ahead of the Department of Justice work he was supposed to be doing. He was also making decisions, backing off a bit from Giancana. So he had all this stuff he was juggling. Then he went to Marilyn's house to look at her kitchen. I said, WTF? What? The Attorney General? Are you kidding me? He was in Los Angeles till the next day. So did they go back to his hotel? Nobody knows. The AG was at this hotel for dinner with Dean Martin. And this was not like, Dean did not like the brothers because they had snubbed Sammy Davis Jr. He had an interracial marriage. Now, Luella Parsons reported on this too, but Dean Martin made no bones about it. He did not like those brothers because Sammy Davis Jr. had spent a lot of time and money on the campaign. And when the older brother won, he didn't get invited to any of the inaugural events because he had an interracial marriage. Dean was astounded when he heard that Davis was not invited to the inauguration. Davis had worked tirelessly for the campaign. Dean met the senator and was shocked. Okay, we're talking about before he was inaugurated. He met him as senator and was shocked by how uninformed he was. He said, this guy has this reputation for this gigantic brain, right? This is the older brother. He said all he read was gossip, gossip newspapers, gossip magazines, looking for his name to be mentioned, and he'd stop and read his name, and then move on to something else looking for his name. He called him fake, that he was pushed into the role by his father, Old Joe. Old Joe, he said, was a racist and an anti-Semite. It took Sinatra much longer to see this, to see through them, than it took Dean. Dean immediately did not like them. He disliked and distrusted the AG and said he was only there for, what, Marilyn? Interesting sidebar here on Dean Martin, which I learned from a podcast called You Must Remember This. And she did a whole thing on Dean Martin. Dean Martin knows racism he knew it when he saw it. He was Italian, and he was Dino Martino was his name. They made him change it. And Italians were considered, this is, the 30s, 40s, 50s, not my opinion. This is social attitudes, not white. And he was terribly discriminated against. He was sensitive to this, and he was very close friends with Sammy Davis Jr. Anyway, Spiros was forced to resign as president of Fox and to get less money for whatever it was he was getting money for. Marilyn went to a meeting on Thursday at her house with Lovathis and Rudin, the lawyer, and Pat Newcomb. She also was doing an interview with Life magazine, and the reporter said she gave the reporter a tour of the house, and she was extremely proud of her house. And she had a lush garden of flowers, and he remarked, "Your garden's beautiful." And she said, "I seem to have the ability to make anything grow." She was glad that it was taped because he says, "Do you mind if I tape her?" And she said she was glad because it avoided errors. She said, "Most people really don't know me." She met again with that reporter on Friday, and while there, Dr. Engelberg showed up to give Marilyn a shot, and the reporter said it pepped her up. She came again on Saturday. The reporter came again on Saturday, and she was very late getting up, and the reporter had to sit around waiting for her to get out of bed. And then she had to get ready. But then she left for a photo shoot with George Baris, and this very interesting photo shoot. The famous photos of her on the beach in a big, heavy, kind of a Mexican sweater, maybe Alaskan sweater. It's hard for me to tell, but a big sweater, and she's on the beach looking kind of cold. That was the photo shoot. He said she used champagne as a prop. She didn't drink as much as people thought she did. She was holding it all the time, but it was her comfort blanket or something, security blanket. He saw in her a zest for living. That's what Marilyn had in the last 9 weeks that led to her death. They went down to the Santa Monica beach, and she chose the spot, although he didn't know this till later, right in front of the Lawford's home. It was near sunset. She wasn't wearing any makeup. And according to George Baris, the photographer, Marilyn could not do anything wrong in front of a camera. She posed for hours. It was so cold she was shivering, and she never complained. That was a pro. The pictures of her crouching in a green towel, and behind her there's a secret love nest with that she used to go to with the older brother. 3 doors down from the Lawfords, there was a small house with a windowless hideaway loft. This is where I should say hi to our subscriber who knows about this. Hi. They would meet there, and nobody could eavesdrop because nobody knew that this little secret place existed. Okay. It's kind of cool to know that people are listening to this who have firsthand knowledge. Here's one of the pictures that he took that day, and it's very famous. Anybody would recognize it. Let me see if they have a picture of her in a sweater. No. Okay. So this is George, and he really liked her. He wanted to make a book of pictures of her. What I particularly liked about Marilyn was that she didn't act like a movie star. I was most impressed that Marilyn was always polite and friendly to everyone on the set. She was no phony, no snob. The two became such good friends that when Baris approached her after she was fired by Fox and asked her if she would collaborate with him for a book project that would involve a series of photographs and interviews, she agreed. He said she was quite excited about us doing the book together. And then it's likely this book, and not her supposed threat to hold a press conference and expose the family, something conjured up 20 years ago by two charlatans we'll talk about. This was the real source of worry and consternation in 1962 for those who had something to hide. Baris must have thought so too, because soon after she died, he scrapped the proposed book, withdrew his photographs of Marilyn for publication, and fled the U.S. This is some serious stuff. He lived abroad in France for the next 2 decades, rarely speaking about her until years later when he proclaimed his belief that she was murdered. That's, wow, that's heavy. There was a defamatory New York Times review of a book that he did with Gloria Steinem that had pictures in it. It was very negative and it was full of lies. It's described as a hit piece about Marilyn. It made accusations. For example, she'd had a dozen or more abortions. This is ridiculous. She had suffered from severe endometriosis, and she did have an ectopic pregnancy, but a far cry from 12 abortions. And why would her private medical information be something that the rest of us are talking about? It's terrible. The author calls the reporter at the New York Times a disgrace to the journalism profession, and I would agree with that. The photographs that were taken at the movie swim scene for Life magazine got $50,000. The photographer who took those got $50,000 for 1 day of filming, and she only got $100,000 for the whole film. They're inequity. And there's some talk about how her body, her physical appearance was overanalyzed and critiqued, and I'm not going to get into it. I just think it's utterly ridiculous. It was all part of media hit jobs. The photos speak for themselves. You know, it's like, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? They would call her fat and looking dissipated. And you see the pictures and she's stunning. So, I don't know. She had a chance to review the transcript for the Life reporter's interview. And she had him take out part where she had accidentally told him about her quietly giving money to needy individuals. She didn't want anyone to know that. She told him, if fame goes by, so long. She said, I've had you, fame. I've always known it's fickle. The reporter called Marilyn said, I never saw any sign that this was a woman giving her last interview on the verge of what they say happened. She pleaded unsuccessfully with the reporter to end his article like this. This is how she wanted it to end. These are the words of Marilyn Monroe. What I really want to say, that what the world really needs is a real feeling of kinship. Everybody, stars, laborers, Negroes, Jews, Arabs, we are all brothers. And here we are, how many years later, still fighting the same fights? It's really sad. Then she added, please don't make me a joke. End the interview with what I believe. But he only used part of her quote. The plea that he not make her look like a joke. He left all the other stuff out, which is why I wanted to honor what she wanted said. Just to speak it out loud, because she was denied that, which seems remarkably petty. Strasburgs, those two, rented an oceanfront house in Santa Monica in 1962. This is such a casual statement. You'd have to donate a couple of organs to be able to afford to rent a house on the beach in Santa Monica now. But she had them back, and so she wasn't alone. The Actors Studio, their little group, was expanding, and Marilyn Monroe's generosity got them a theatrical investor and a $2 million budget, which in today's money would be $17 million. The Strasburgs were heading to Italy for a festival with Susan, their daughter, and Marilyn planned to go too, but contrary to gossip and bad journalism, she had them with her all summer long for support in Los Angeles. She was not alone, pining away. Now, it remains to be seen how problematic they were, but they were there. July 2nd of 62, she called the AG in D.C. to plan getting together on the 4th of July in L.A. His calendar says Pat Newcomb. Was that a code? Marilyn was invited to a party at the Lawfords and simultaneously a party at the Strasburgs, and she had a hard time deciding how to juggle both of them. She went to the Lawfords, and she promised Paula that she'd come immediately afterwards. But she drove up and she saw all the celebrities milling about, and she just became overwhelmed and didn't go in. And Paula was very mad, took it personally. Later, she said she regretted spending time with the politicians, and it was plural, and the question is, were they both there? It's a good question. I'm collecting questions for Deborah Lupian. The AG's calendar gives no answer. It's blank all the way through the holiday weekend to the 6th. Did he stay in Los Angeles? We don't know. Was Jack there? We don't know. Top secret FBI memos seems to indicate that older brother and Marilyn had recently gotten together. This was written in July. So what were they referring to? It was mentioned in the Valley Times, which is a local paper, that there was a party at the Lawfords for the two brothers. The reporters often went along with off the record for the older brother, and especially when it had to do with the brothers' girlfriends. They helped to create a fiction of a devoted family man. It sold magazines, it sold publications. Gossip columnists had to be really careful. It is true that they both, but especially the older brother, had easy access to many anonymous military planes and airports, and thought nothing of hopping on a military plane and going halfway across the country or all the way across the country and back in one night. It was not, nobody had to know about it. It was all top secret. This says that he was a man with a restless nature. Close friends of his said he had an almost neurotic fear of boredom and being alone. He hates to be alone. Marilyn was the same. Both of them craved a mother's love, is what Jordan said. Here are two glamorous, famous people who were kind of empty inside. I don't know about empty inside, but did they find kinship in their loneliness? He was leading kind of a double, well, he was definitely leading a double life. He'd make a speech on freedom on the same day as he put wiretaps into the White House. He even had close aides who didn't know about this. Only one of his secretaries and two techs ever knew about it. He personally had recorded over 300 meetings, 248 hours of secret tapes, 275 phone calls. Nixon had no idea. There's some editing, debating around this time about Marilyn because there seemed to be 4 tapes missing, and they're like, is it possible that it was selective that these are missing? It's odd because some of the existing tapes that you can listen to are not flattering to the older brother. What was so bad, or why did these particular tapes have to be removed? The missing ones. One tape, Tech says that they put tapes in the mansion that the family stayed at, and those are now missing. What got said on these tapes that we will never hear? Good question. For Ted, the younger brother, one aide remembers transcripts of erotic calls, and he remembers transcripts of erotic calls from Marilyn. Interesting irony, given the reaction of the Democrats to the Nixon tapes. The older brother's on tape talking about the CIA spying domestically. They had a tight grip on the media. They shaped the narrative of major events for their own purposes. They intentionally cultivated the media to manipulate them. They wanted to use the federal government to spy on reporters. I mean, this was a whole plan. Oddly, he began with a plan to be a journalist in his life. He was going to be one of those guys. He was publicly a huge supporter of the free press. He was a huge opponent to censorship. He lied a lot, and he hid a lot about his life. His health was terrible, all of his girlfriends, and the spying that he was doing. July 2nd, 1962, Alan Grant came to her house to take photos for a Life magazine interview that was being done or had been done. And it came out, this interview and photo shoot came out on Life magazine one day before her death. Grant, the photographer, told the columnist Liz Smith, quote, "As she talked to me, she stopped being the provocative, sexy movie star. I suddenly saw a real flesh and blood woman, warm and sweet. She told me about the books she read and her interest in designing furniture and all the things nobody knew or cared about her. I was quite moved." Marilyn called this interview the most accurate and gratifying that anyone had done of her in a long time. Hedda Hopper on July 6th did a nasty column about her and said that she was glad that Marilyn Monroe was out, like her career's over, she's out. Luella Parsons was friends with Marilyn and was usually pretty cooperative and flattering. However, she had a substitute. She was gone, and the substitute was Dorothy Manners, and she also was unkind to Marilyn and said, oh, she crawled back in her shell. Marilyn told George Baris that when I work, I never go out. So she just was upset because they were implying she was a party girl, and she really wasn't. When I'm not working, I go to visit friends. I just don't tell the press about it. Okay. Let's see here. Incredible number of notes on this book. She also often had friends over to visit. She spent a lot of time on the phone. She had a kind of an ongoing telephone relationship with Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio, who we'll call Joe Sr., and his son Joe Jr. brought Joe Jr.'s fiancée by. Joe Sr. and Marilyn had a bitter row about the AG and her career, and Marilyn said that she was upset that he laid his hands on her again and she was afraid of his temper. We're talking Joe now. It seems like all the men in her life, to some extent or another, romantically involved, were problematic. She was trying to avoid Joe. She was afraid of his temper. She was shocked to hear that he wasn't planning to attend his son's graduation from boot camp. He was in the military. So she talked him into it. She told him, either you go or I will. It shamed him, and he went. She gave Joe Jr. $400 for repairs after he had a car accident. And when Joe Sr. found out, he was furious, and he made him pay it back in cash. He said, you don't give her a check because she'll never cash it. You give her cash. After she died, they found the $400 stuffed inside a vase in the living room. The record shows 8 very short calls to the AG, and what happens is she would call him, it would be like a signal, and then he would call back. And they talked on different phones. He wasn't avoiding her, it was a system that they had. I mean, he was busy. No, it was a system that they had. This is news. This is a new little tidbit here from the book. She had his unlisted home phone number. And she didn't always call him through the White House personnel on the official record. So she may very well have been talking to him way more often than people realize. Why the subterfuge? She had his number on a piece of paper, and she kept it hidden, taped on the inside of a random book on her bookshelf. It was found after her death. Why would you do that if it wasn't some sort of an intimate relationship? And it's been confirmed. That was his home number. Chapter 36, Triumph and Danger for Marilyn. She was not a recluse. She was socially very active in the summer of '62. She told her reporter she was ready to go back to work quickly. She was flexible, and in her life, she said, I can go it alone. Her advice was enjoy the day. Don't be sad about being single. She wasn't sad about it. She said you could be alone with a husband. She wasn't depressed. She wasn't pining for the brothers or Joe. She was described as relaxed and eager to talk. She says she lost sleep over more important things than them. She lost sleep over the H-bomb. An actor isn't a system. I just have me, and I carry my ability wherever I go. I can work anywhere there's a part to play. I'd like to come back to England. What I do is to try to keep informed and up to date and learn about life. I don't rush, which is maybe why I'm late a few times. You rush and you just run yourself down. That's why I like being in my 30s. It's so much better than being in the rushing 20s. Then she said, I don't go in for this entire American pace. I take my time and I try to care and take effort about things. I take care to be a human being. That's important, not being a human being. I mean, it's important that you do be a human being, in other words. On July 12th, she had a meeting with Fox, and she went in dressed like a businesswoman. She went in dressed like a librarian or an executive with glasses and a suit and everything. They tried to lure her back and wanted her to get rid of Greenson and the Strasburgs and Newcomb. They also wanted her to give up things in her contract like final creative say, script approval, and being able to see the dailies. And she refused that. She refused that absolutely. As her 55 contract said, that's what she was supposed to get. She wanted to fire Cukor, and she wanted script approval. The executives presented her with a written apology for her to sign, an apology from her, for her to sign, citing that she had a barbiturate problem, tardiness, and a lack of discipline. She already knew this because Time magazine had leaked the story that there would be no public apology, not from Marilyn. She had steely resolve. All was forgiven. She hung on and stuck to her guns. The lawsuits would be dropped. They appreciated that she had never named Fox publicly, and they considered that attitude loyalty, which went a long way. By the time the meeting adjourned, Marilyn Monroe, the one who so many contemporaneous reporters, so-called suicide investigators, subsequent biographers, and other naysayers have claimed was now incapable of acting, was mentally ill, in a drug and alcohol-induced haze, no longer a star, she walked out the door of a major motion picture studio with $1 million deal. $500,000 for Something's Got to Give, which was a 500% increase in pay, and another $500,000 for an additional movie, the musical comedy What a Way to Go, also referred to as I Love Louisa. Her own publicist, Arthur Jacobs, was the leading candidate to produce that movie. That million in 1962 is the equivalent today of a $10,224,866 deal. If ever there was an occasion to pop the cork on a bottle of Dom Perignon, this was it. That was her favorite champagne. Maybe she shampooed it. No, I'm kidding. So the next day was July 13th, and Jerry Wald died suddenly, and he had given her first part in the Clash by Night movie. He was always a big supporter of her. He had been a very successful producer. He was involved in the pre-production of the AG's anti-mob, The Enemy Within. And he had been threatened because of it. Giancana and Hoffa didn't want the movie made. Wald's brother questioned, was it a heart attack or the mobster movie that killed him? That's as much as he would say. Then Zanuck got death threats, and the movie was abandoned. Interesting. So this day that he died was the same day that the Department of Justice sued MCA, an antitrust suit, which had its tentacles in the Screen Actors Guild, the Writers Guild, Decca, Universal, and TV. It was like an octopus. Ronald Reagan, the head of SAG, let the MCA have a stranglehold on TV. Marilyn had left MCA. She knew that the AG was going to sue it because of organized crime, and she wanted no part of it. She had warned her agent 6 months earlier, and he didn't believe her. And he was shocked when it did finally happen. The rumor was that the AG was going after them to avenge Monroe. But this put her in a terrible situation, put stress on her. The Department of Justice had planned to go after MCA months and months before Marilyn and the AG ever got together romantically. But Shirley MacLaine blamed her for setting the AG onto MCA, like Marilyn Monroe actively set him to go after them, but she didn't. Marilyn was obsessed with making it known that she was not the reason, that it was not a personal vendetta on her behalf. MCA even threatened to sue her because of it. It's so many people mad, so many complicated relationships. Allegedly, the AG asked her to help him, and he gave her secret information. This is poor judgment and potentially dangerous for Marilyn. It's hard to know what was going on here. Grand jury witnesses in this suit were terrified. Joseph Cotton, the actor, was threatened. Betty Grable allegedly was bribed. The government investigators were warned about concrete shoes, and the Attorney General dragged Marilyn into the middle of this mess. She arranged to meet with Sidney Korshak, the most powerful attorney in the world, according to the FBI, who was good friends with Lew Wasserman, the president of MCA. He was the guy Judith Campbell went to when sleeping with the older brother to report to Giancana, and she was being surveilled by the FBI. She was being like a messenger between POTUS and Giancana. And this guy, Wasserman, was involved in that. Judith said, I was never afraid of Sam. Giancana should have been, That was psycho. But Sid frightened me. Sid Korshak? I could feel the power he wielded as he sat there watching me. I had as much chance staring him down as I would have had with a lizard. He was the most important contact, Korshak was, that the mob had to legitimate business, labor, Hollywood, and Vegas. But he never had an office in LA. He didn't even have a California law license. His wife was close friends with Patricia Lawford. And he was close friends with Joe Sr. And Eunice. His wife decorated Sinatra's homes. So that whole family, Eunice, the sister of the brothers, not Eunice the housekeeper, Eunice the sister of the brothers. So there was this circular connection of all these people. They were close friends with the biggest mob attorney in the country, that family, from outside Boston. Marilyn was stuck in the middle of the AG's fight against MCA and the mob. It's been said that in Korshak's circle, there was a Monroe consideration. She was on their radar, and this wasn't good. Meanwhile, the FBI files, and I mean, these are documented official FBI files, Freedom of Information. They indicate that sources in Mexico told the FBI about a Monroe conversation with the older brother about the morality of the A-bomb and the A-tests. And that month, the AG was witnessing tests in Nevada. Eunice Murray was still reporting about her and lying. This is from Eunice. Marilyn Monroe reflects the views of Arthur Miller. She was setting Marilyn up to meet communist spies, and then she was ratting on her to the FBI. Very weird. The USSR was threatened by the U.S. nuclear power. The U.S. had 6,000 nukes, and Russia, the USSR, had 300. And they decided to put some in Cuba. And this reached a crisis in October of '62. There was an international confrontation, and the whole world was on the brink of nuclear war. Both brothers did reveal secrets throughout their lives in pillow talk. That's documented. In the last weeks of her life, Marilyn had faced a coordinated smear campaign to destroy her reputation. Hedda Hopper was big in this. They blamed her for shutting down the movie. They accused her of pushing Fox around. She was falsely accused of creating and okaying flawed scripts, all untrue. She was ridiculed for having a production company of her own. Erskine Johnson, a newspaper guy for the Enterprise Association, he was a reporter, he was very toxic. He called this the end of her career, that she'd lost control of herself, that she was unable to deliver a performance. She was misguided. He ridiculed her potential TV image. Called her a drunk, that she had champagne and Bloody Marys for breakfast, a lush, but that's not true. Many who knew her said that she never got drunk and did not drink hard liquor. If she was showing the effects of anything, it was the drugs the doctors were giving her. He suggested offbeat Oscars to be called Marilyn's and given to stars who caused problems. Really a nasty piece of work. Many other reporters joined in. They called her unprofessional. Even Earl Wilson, who had actually been a bit of a supporter, put it this way: Marilyn, Hollywood gag, this is a joke. Did you hear Marilyn Monroe was offered a movie part? It was a walk-off role. Haha. Carolyn Jones, Morticia Adams, defended her. And she blamed poor management. She said Blame the management, not the stars. Actors have been made the villains to cover up the compounded series of mistakes made by the motion picture industry to divert the attention of Wall Street investors from mismanagement. Boom. She met the onslaught, Marilyn did, of public humiliation with a very shrewd PR campaign. She had these beautiful pictures taken by George Baris, by Life magazine, by Vogue. I mean, and she created this positive image of herself. And when she was interviewed as a human being and not as the Marilyn Monroe, she was very down to earth, and she struck all these different interviewers. She said, oh, you know, she's so intelligent, she's so nice, she's so natural, she's so real. Kind of flew in the face of all the baloney that was being said about her in the media. So that's the end of that chapter. And we'll move forward next time. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope that you are enjoying this as much as I am. It's just fascinating. I know it's a lot of videos, but it's worth it. Thanks very much, and Slán go fóill, slánte.